My brother got married while I was in emergency surgery after a severe car accident, and my family blamed me for ruining his wedding day until our relatives found out the truth and cut them off completely. I am 28 years old and my younger brother Kevin is 25. We grew up in what I thought was a close family, though looking back there were always signs that Kevin was the favorite child. Our parents, especially our mother, always seemed to prioritize Kevin's needs and wants over mine. If we both wanted something and they could only afford one, Kevin would get it. If we had a conflict, I was expected to be the mature one and compromise. I moved out at 22 after finishing college and getting a job as an engineer at a manufacturing firm 2 hours away from my hometown. Kevin stayed local, working at our father's auto repair shop and living at home. Our parents were thrilled to have him close by and would often make comments about how I had abandoned the family by moving away for work. They never acknowledged that I had to go where the job opportunities were. Despite the distance, I tried to maintain a relationship with my family. I would drive home once a month for Sunday dinners and always came back for holidays and special occasions. I called my parents weekly to check in and stay connected. Kevin and I had a decent relationship, though we were never particularly close. He was more interested in cars and sports while I was more academically focused. We got along fine but did not have much in common. Last year, Kevin got engaged to his girlfriend Amanda. They had been dating for 3 years and everyone in the family loved her. My parents were ecstatic about the engagement and immediately started helping them plan an elaborate wedding. My mother got heavily involved in every detail, treating it like the social event of the decade. She talked about the wedding constantly every time I called or visited. The wedding was scheduled for a Saturday in late September. I had requested that weekend off from work months in advance and made plans to drive home on Friday afternoon. I would stay at a hotel since my old room had been converted into a home gym for my father. The plan was to attend the rehearsal dinner Friday evening, help with any last-minute setup on Saturday morning, and then attend the wedding ceremony and reception on Saturday afternoon. My parents asked me to be involved in the wedding party as a groomsman, which I accepted. Kevin and I were not close enough for me to be his best man. That honor went to his best friend Tyler, but being a groomsman seemed appropriate for brothers. I rented a tux that matched the other groomsmen and bought an expensive gift from their registry. The week before the wedding was busy at work. We were in the middle of a major project deadline and I was working late every night to ensure everything would be completed before I took the Friday off. My manager was understanding about the time off but stressed that I needed to have everything finished before leaving. I was exhausted but determined to make it to Kevin's wedding. Friday afternoon finally arrived and I left work around 2 in the afternoon. The drive home usually took about 2 hours on the highway. Traffic was light and weather conditions were good. I was tired from the long work week but looking forward to seeing my family and celebrating Kevin's wedding. I had my suit for the rehearsal dinner in the back seat and my overnight bag packed with everything I would need for the weekend. About an hour into my drive, traffic started slowing down. I could see brake lights ahead and assumed there was congestion or perhaps an accident blocking lanes. I began slowing down along with the other vehicles. That is when I noticed in my rearview mirror that a large truck behind me was not slowing down. The driver appeared distracted, possibly looking at his phone, and was approaching at full highway speed. I realized the truck was going to hit me and there was nothing I could do. The lanes beside me were full of cars and I had nowhere to go. I braced for impact as the truck slammed into the back of my car at full speed. The force of the collision was tremendous. My car was crushed and pushed forward into the vehicle ahead of me. I remember the sound of metal crunching and glass shattering, then everything went black. I woke up briefly in an ambulance. Everything hurt and I could hear paramedics talking urgently about my condition. Someone was asking me questions but I could not focus enough to answer. I lost consciousness again before we reached the hospital. Later I was told that I had been unconscious at the accident scene and had to be extracted from my vehicle by emergency crews using specialized equipment. At the hospital, doctors discovered I had suffered severe injuries. I had multiple broken ribs, a punctured lung, internal bleeding, a fractured pelvis, and a serious head injury. I was rushed into emergency surgery to address the internal bleeding and collapsed lung. The surgery was extensive and complicated, taking over 6 hours. I remained unconscious throughout and for some time afterward. I later learned that the police had found my phone in the wreckage and contacted my parents as my emergency contacts. They were informed that I had been in a serious accident and was in emergency surgery. The officer explained the severity of my injuries and told them which hospital I had been taken to. My parents acknowledged the information and said they understood. What happened next I only found out about weeks later. My parents received the call about my accident around 5 in the evening on Friday. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 6:30. Rather than cancel or postpone any wedding events, my parents decided not to tell anyone about my accident. They attended the rehearsal dinner as planned, smiled through the toasts and speeches, and acted as if nothing was wrong. When people asked where I was, my parents told them I had been delayed at work but would definitely be there tomorrow for the wedding. They made excuses about me being unreliable and always putting work first. They laughed about how typical it was for me to be late to important family events. No one had any idea that I was lying in a hospital bed fighting for my life during emergency surgery. Saturday morning came and I was still unconscious in intensive care. The surgery had gone as well as could be expected but my condition was critical. I had tubes and monitors attached to me and doctors were watching me closely for any complications. My parents knew exactly where I was and what condition I was in, yet they proceeded with the wedding as if nothing was wrong. The wedding ceremony took place at 3 in the afternoon. My parents walked down the aisle smiling. Kevin got married surrounded by friends and family. The reception followed with dinner, dancing, and celebration. Throughout the entire event, my parents continued to tell people I had been delayed by work but might still show up later. They blamed me for missing my own brother's wedding, painting me as selfish and unreliable. It was not until late Saturday night, after the reception had ended and the newlyweds had left for their hotel, that my parents finally drove to the hospital. They arrived around 11 at night, more than 30 hours after being notified of my accident. I was still unconscious when they arrived. The doctors updated them on my condition and the extent of my injuries. My mother's main concern, according to the nurse who was present, was whether I would be upset about missing the wedding. I remained unconscious for another 2 days. When I finally woke up on Monday afternoon, I was confused and in tremendous pain. I could not remember the accident clearly and had no idea how long I had been in the hospital. A nurse explained that I had been in a serious car accident on Friday and had undergone major surgery. She told me I was lucky to be alive. My parents arrived at the hospital Monday evening. My mother came into my room and her first words were about how disappointed she was that I had missed Kevin's wedding. Before I could even process what she was saying, she launched into a complaint about how my absence had caused problems. People kept asking where I was and my parents had to keep making excuses. She said I had embarrassed the family. I was barely conscious and heavily medicated, but I tried to explain that I had been in a car accident. My mother cut me off and said she knew about the accident, but that did not change the fact that I had missed my brother's wedding. She said Kevin was hurt that his only brother could not be bothered to show up for the most important day of his life. She told me people were talking about what a terrible brother I was. My father stood silently by while my mother continued her tirade. She said I had always been selfish and this just proved it. She claimed I probably had not been paying attention while driving and caused the accident myself through carelessness. She said I should have been more careful on such an important weekend. The fact that I was lying in a hospital bed with serious injuries seemed completely irrelevant to her. Over the next few days as I started to recover, my family's visits followed the same pattern. My mother would complain about the wedding and how my absence had affected things. Kevin came by once and barely spoke to me, clearly upset that I had missed his wedding. My father remained mostly silent, occasionally agreeing with my mother's assessment that I should have been more careful. No one seemed concerned about my injuries or recovery. My extended family started hearing about my accident through social media and phone calls. My Aunt Linda, my father's sister, called the hospital to check on me and was shocked to learn I had been there since Friday. She asked why no one had informed the family about such a serious accident. The hospital staff, not realizing this was supposed to be a secret, told her when I had been admitted and the nature of my injuries. Aunt Linda immediately called my parents demanding to know why they had not told anyone in the family about my accident. My mother apparently told her that they did not want to ruin Kevin's wedding with bad news. Aunt Linda was horrified and asked if they had even gone to the hospital on Friday when they were first notified. My mother admitted they had attended all the wedding events before finally visiting me late Saturday night. The news spread quickly through my extended family. Aunt Linda told her siblings, who told their children, and soon everyone knew that my parents had chosen to attend a wedding rather than be with their seriously injured son in the hospital. They knew that my parents had blamed me for missing the wedding despite knowing I was unconscious in intensive care. The reaction from my relatives was unanimous shock and disgust. My grandmother, my mother's mother, called my mother and absolutely tore into her. She told my mother she was ashamed to have raised such a cold and selfish daughter. She said there was no excuse for attending a wedding while one of your children was in emergency surgery. She told my mother that she had shown everyone what her priorities were and they did not include me. My grandmother said she wanted nothing to do with parents who could treat their child so callously. My uncle Robert, my mother's brother, visited me in the hospital and apologized profusely for not knowing about my accident sooner. He said if he had known, he would have been there immediately. He told me that several family members were furious with my parents and Kevin for how they had handled everything. He said people were canceling planned visits with my parents and reconsidering their relationships with them. More relatives started visiting me in the hospital, bringing flowers and expressing their concern and anger about the situation. My cousin Jennifer told me she had been at the wedding and if she had known I was in the hospital, she would have left immediately to be with me. She said she felt sick knowing she had been celebrating while I was fighting for my life. She cried and apologized even though none of it was her fault. The hospital staff had witnessed my parents' behavior and several nurses made comments about how unusual it was. One nurse told me privately that in her 20 years of nursing, she had never seen parents wait so long to visit a critically injured child. Another mentioned that my mother seemed more concerned about social embarrassment than my health. Their observations confirmed that my family's behavior was not normal or acceptable. My parents started receiving calls from angry relatives. Aunt Linda called my mother every day to express her disappointment. My grandmother stopped taking my mother's calls entirely. My uncle Robert sent my father a long text message about family priorities and what it means to be a parent. Other relatives made their feelings known through various channels. My parents were being socially ostracized by our entire extended family. Kevin and Amanda returned from their honeymoon to find their wedding being discussed throughout the family, but not in the way they had hoped. Instead of people talking about how beautiful the ceremony was or how happy the couple looked, everyone was discussing how the groom's brother had been in the hospital during the wedding and no one had been told. Kevin tried to defend my parents, but most relatives were not interested in excuses. My recovery was slow and painful. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital before being discharged. I could not return to my apartment because I needed help with basic tasks while my injuries healed. Aunt Linda insisted I come stay with her and her husband. She set up their guest room for me and took time off work to help with my care. She said there was no way she would let me go home with my parents after how they had treated me. Living with Aunt Linda, I learned more about how the family had reacted to everything. She showed me text messages from various relatives expressing their anger at my parents. My grandmother had apparently told my mother she was not welcome at family gatherings until she apologized and made things right. Several cousins had unfriended my parents on social media. The family was fractured and it was entirely due to my parents' choices. My mother called me at Aunt Linda's house trying to smooth things over. She said I was being dramatic and needed to understand that Kevin's wedding was a once-in-a-lifetime event. She claimed they could not have canceled or left early because they had responsibilities as parents of the groom. She said I should be mature enough to understand why they made the choices they did. Her complete lack of remorse or empathy was stunning. I told my mother that being in emergency surgery after a near-fatal accident should have trumped any wedding obligations. I said normal parents would have canceled or postponed the wedding, or at minimum would have left the reception to be with their injured child. I pointed out that they had not just neglected to visit me, they had actively lied to people about why I was not at the wedding and blamed me for missing it. My mother became defensive and said I was being unfair. She claimed she had been in an impossible situation and did the best she could. She said Kevin deserved to have his perfect wedding day and my accident, while unfortunate, did not need to ruin that for him. She actually used the phrase that my accident was unfortunate timing. As if I had planned to be hit by a truck to inconvenience my brother's wedding schedule. I told my mother I needed space and time to process everything. She started crying and saying I was turning the whole family against her. I pointed out that she had done that herself through her actions and choices. The family was not upset because I was telling lies about her, they were upset because the truth about her behavior was indefensible. I ended the call and blocked her number temporarily. Kevin called me a few days later. He said he understood I was hurt but I needed to forgive our parents because they were just trying to give him a nice wedding. He said I was being selfish by staying with Aunt Linda instead of going home. He claimed I was making a bigger deal out of this than necessary and causing drama in the family. His complete inability to see the problem with the situation showed how deeply the favoritism had warped his perspective. I asked Kevin how he would feel if Amanda had been in a serious accident during some important event in my life and I had chosen to attend my event rather than go to the hospital. Kevin said that was different because Amanda was his wife. I pointed out that at the time of his wedding, I was his brother lying critically injured in a hospital. The mental gymnastics he was doing to justify our parents' behavior was remarkable. More relatives reached out to me expressing their support. My cousin Brian told me he had stopped speaking to my parents entirely after learning what happened. My Aunt Susan sent me a care package with a note saying she was disgusted by how I had been treated. Even relatives I barely knew were reaching out to check on my recovery and express their anger at my parents' choices. My grandmother called me at Aunt Linda's house. She apologized for not knowing about my accident sooner and said if she had been informed, she would have been at the hospital immediately. She told me she had raised my mother better than this and was ashamed of her daughter's behavior. She said my mother had always favored Kevin, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. She promised I would always have a place in her home and life regardless of what happened with my parents. The family dynamics had completely shifted. Events were being planned without inviting my parents or Kevin. Holidays were being discussed and my parents were being excluded. Several relatives had made it clear they were choosing sides and they were not choosing my parents. The social consequences they were facing were severe and entirely of their own making. My parents tried to spin the narrative in their favor. My mother posted on social media about how hurt she was that family members were being cruel to her during a difficult time. She portrayed herself as the victim of unfair judgment. Several relatives responded to her post with the actual facts about what happened, including that she had attended a full wedding while her son was in surgery. She deleted the post within an hour. Kevin and Amanda's wedding pictures were posted online and barely received any engagement from family members. Usually such posts would get dozens of likes and congratulatory comments from relatives. Instead, there were only a handful of responses, mostly from Amanda's family who did not know the full story. The silence from my family was deafening and spoke volumes about how they felt. Physical therapy for my injuries was challenging but necessary. I had to relearn how to move properly after the fractures and build back my strength. Aunt Linda drove me to every appointment and encouraged me through the painful process. She told me constantly how proud she was of my progress and how strong I was. The support she provided was what I should have received from my parents. 3 months after the accident, I was finally able to return to my apartment and resume work on a modified schedule. My employer had been incredibly understanding and held my position for me throughout my recovery. My coworkers sent cards and gifts while I was hospitalized. Some of them even drove the 2 hours to visit me at Aunt Linda's house. The support from non-family members made my parents' absence even more glaring. My parents attempted reconciliation as they realized the extent of their social isolation. My mother sent me a letter saying she was sorry I was hurt by their choices and hoped we could move past this. The apology was hollow, focusing on my feelings being hurt rather than acknowledging that their behavior was fundamentally wrong. She made no mention of understanding why what they did was indefensible. I wrote back to my mother explaining that until she could acknowledge what she actually did wrong, not just that my feelings were hurt, there would be no relationship. I outlined specifically that she and my father had chosen to attend a wedding rather than be with me during a life-threatening medical emergency. I noted that they had lied about my absence and blamed me for missing the wedding. I said these were not matters of interpretation but facts, and until she acknowledged these facts, we had nothing to discuss. My mother responded with anger, saying I was being stubborn and immature. She said she had apologized and I should accept it and move on. She claimed I was punishing her unfairly and using the family against her. She still could not see that the consequences she was facing were the natural result of her actions, not some conspiracy I had orchestrated. Her inability to take responsibility was absolute. Holiday season approached and the family split became permanent. My grandmother hosted Thanksgiving and explicitly did not invite my parents or Kevin. She told them they were not welcome until they made genuine amends for their behavior. Other relatives followed suit with their own gatherings. My parents ended up spending holidays alone with Kevin and Amanda, isolated from the extended family they had been part of for decades. Kevin tried to bridge the gap by inviting people to gatherings at his new house. Most relatives declined or made excuses. A few attended out of politeness to Amanda, who was not at fault for any of this, but the events were awkward and tense. Kevin started to realize the long-term social consequences of defending our parents' indefensible behavior. My relationship with Aunt Linda and other relatives grew stronger through this ordeal. I spent holidays with them and felt more loved and supported than I had ever felt with my immediate family. These relatives showed me what family was supposed to be, people who prioritize each other's well-being and show up during crises. The contrast with my parents' behavior could not have been more stark. A year has passed since the accident and wedding. I have physically recovered, though I still have some chronic pain from my injuries. My relationship with my parents remains severed and I have accepted that it may never be repaired. They have not genuinely apologized or acknowledged the severity of their choices. Kevin and I barely speak, communicating only through occasional text messages about practical matters. The extended family remains largely split. Most relatives continue to exclude my parents from gatherings and holidays. A few have tried to remain neutral but find it difficult when the facts of the situation are so clear. My grandmother has maintained her stance that my parents are not welcome at family events until they make real amends, which they have not done. My mother occasionally sends me messages about how I am tearing the family apart and need to be the bigger person. The irony of her asking me to be the bigger person after she attended a wedding while I was in emergency surgery is not lost on me. She still frames this as a disagreement or misunderstanding rather than a fundamental failure of parenting and human decency. I have built a good life despite everything that happened. My career has progressed well and I recently got promoted. I have a solid support system through my extended family and friends. I am in therapy working through the trauma of both the accident and my family's betrayal. I am learning to set healthy boundaries and recognize toxic behavior patterns. Some people think I should forgive my parents and move on. They say family is important and grudges hurt everyone. But I have learned that family is not just about biology, it is about who shows up for you when you need them. My parents proved they would not show up for me even during a life-threatening emergency. That revealed their true priorities and character in a way that cannot be undone. Kevin reached out last month saying he and Amanda were expecting a baby. He asked if I would be willing to be part of the child's life despite our estrangement. I told him I needed to think about it. I do not want to punish an innocent child for their father's choices, but I also cannot pretend that everything is fine when it is not. I am still processing what level of relationship, if any, is healthy for me to have with my brother's family. My grandmother told me recently that she is proud of how I have handled this situation. She said I have shown more maturity and strength than my parents ever have. She said standing up for yourself and refusing to accept unacceptable treatment is not being difficult or dramatic, it is having self-respect. Her support and validation have been healing in ways I did not expect. The truck driver who hit me was found at fault for the accident and faced legal consequences. My insurance covered my medical expenses and I received a settlement that helped with my recovery costs. The legal system provided accountability that my family never did. The contrast between how institutions and extended family handled the situation versus how my parents handled it is stark. I sometimes wonder if my parents will ever truly understand what they did wrong. Will they ever grasp that attending a wedding while your child is in emergency surgery is not a difficult choice, it is an impossible choice that only terrible parents would make? Will they ever acknowledge that lying about my absence and blaming me for missing the wedding was cruel and manipulative? I doubt they will, but I have accepted that their understanding is not required for me to move forward. My life now is peaceful and surrounded by people who genuinely care about me. Aunt Linda remains one of my closest family members. My grandmother and I talk weekly. Various cousins and extended relatives stay in regular contact. I have built a chosen family from the relatives who showed me what real family looks like. My parents and Kevin made their choices, and now they live with the consequences of those choices while I live free from their toxicity.